Kristaps Porzingis says he's ready to remind people what he's capable of. Will that be in a Dallas Mavericks uniform? Ultimately, will be the question. This is the Gray Area right here on Kevin Gray Sports. My name is Kevin Gray. You can find me on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram at Kevin Gray Sports. Be sure to hit that subscribe button right there for all things Kevin Gray Sports here on YouTube. You can find me on your home of the Dallas Cowboys and Texas Rangers, 105.3 The Fan. Kristaps Porzingis, speaking to Public Broadcasting of Latvia in an extended interview, talked about the 2020-2021 NBA season for himself in relation to the Dallas Mavericks, a guy who averaged over 20 points per game and over 9 rebounds, shot a career high in true shooting percentage, whose post-All-Star game numbers increased when it came to field goal percentage, three-point field goal percentage, and points per game overall. Kristaps Porzingis during the second half of the year started to play a lot like the unicorn that the Mavericks thought that they were getting when they traded for him and signed him to a 5-year, $158 million contract. Obviously, injury still a part of Kristaps Porzingis' narrative, and then what happened in the NBA playoffs in a 7-game series loss to the Los Angeles Clippers. Kristaps Porzingis was reduced to more of a floor spacer, a guy camped out at the three-point line, who was not really able to have the kind of effect that he wanted to have in the NBA playoffs. Kristaps Porzingis saying in that extended interview, quote, "I was put in a corner and given a task to perform, and I did it as a soldier," end quote. Porzingis goes on to say, "It was difficult, of course, at the beginning to take it all in because I am not accustomed to my role suddenly being reduced, but once I accepted it, it wasn't hard to play. Win or lose, if you have done everything in your power, you can go home and go to sleep peacefully. I focus on what I can do better, how I can be a better basketball player and a better person," end quote. Obviously, mature words for a guy who has seen his fair share of criticism, especially this past season, for what he was not able to do in helping the Dallas Mavericks. Now, the numbers say, of course, that Kristaps Porzingis and Luka Doncic were the most efficient pick-and-roll duo in all of the NBA this past season. But you could also see by watching with your very own eyes how awkward the fit was at times between Doncic and Porzingis. You say, Kevin, well, what about the apex of their performance together against the New Orleans Pelicans, where Luka Doncic went off for 46 points and your man Kristaps Porzingis went 8 of 13 from the three-point line, scored 36 points, and they made beautiful music together offensively against the Pelicans. That's the very apex of what those two could be. But at the same time, Kristaps Porzingis has been reportedly, obviously, frustrated at times during the season with his not being a focal point, if you will. And of course, you've heard rumors and things such about how his relationship could continue to deteriorate between him and Luka Doncic. I don't necessarily believe those things and haven't believed necessarily those things, but you can tell at best their fit on the court is awkward. But this is more about Kristaps Porzingis. Kristaps Porzingis, at 25, 26 years old, is going into one of his most important off seasons ever as a professional basketball player. You already heard Jason Kidd, the new head coach of the Dallas Mavericks, say that Kristaps Porzingis is a quote-unquote perfect fit for Luka Doncic, and they're excited about what Kristaps Porzingis is going to potentially be doing for the Mavericks this year now that he has a full offseason to be healthy and to work out and put in the kind of time and effort to his game, more so than going into rehab to try and get himself prepared to work on his game prior to an upcoming season. So obviously that's a good sign for the Mavericks when you start thinking about what it means for Porzingis. But for Porzingis himself, look, he was told what he had to do, and he felt that he did what he had to do based on what Rick Carlisle was giving to him, based on what the Clippers were doing. Now, you can say however you feel about Kristaps Porzingis and how he ultimately performed in that role, but he did what he was asked to do. Mark Cuban obviously feels like this is a guy who is much more maligned than he should have been and should be in a better position under Jason Kidd as the head coach of this team to be unlocked much more than what he was reduced to toward the end of the regular season and more so into the playoffs. For him, it's going to be important to, as he says, quote-unquote, remind people what he's capable of. And what he's capable of is being a 20-10 guy who can be a shot blocker and a rim protector, but more importantly, a guy who can create a presence on the inside to alter shots and be a guy that can stretch the floor from the three-point line. What he does have to improve upon, obviously, is his consistency when it comes to guarding and sitting down and guarding folks, continuing to move and learn to cut without the basketball to be much more effective when he doesn't have the basketball in his hands. But all of this comes at the behest and willingness of Kristaps Porzingis to be able to put behind him what was at times a difficult season. A guy who started the season late after coming off of a torn Achilles, a guy who at times dealt with wrist problem, ankle problems, dealt with a myriad of injuries again this past season. But this is about Kristaps Porzingis. This is about the Dallas Mavericks moving forward and what they believe Jason Kidd and this new coaching staff will ultimately unlock with him. And if that is the case, then yeah, you run it back for one more year. Because look, a lot of folks are jumping in my comments saying, look, it's time to move on for Kristaps Porzingis. You've got an opportunity to be able to build around Luka Doncic. You may have an opportunity to see Josh Richardson if he decides to decline his $11.6 million option to maybe sign somewhere else. Maybe you go after a guy in Norman Powell who declined his $11.6 million option, a guy at 28 years of age, shot over 41% from the three-point line, a career high, had over 18 points, a career high for him after being traded from the Toronto Raptors to the Portland Trail Blazers. What do you do with Tim Hardaway Jr.? Do you move on from him, let him potentially sign elsewhere, with the rumors being that he may want to go back home to play in Miami? What do you do with Kristaps Porzingis ultimately? That is obviously the biggest question for the Mavericks this season, which I think has aptly been answered. They're not moving on from Kristaps Porzingis. And for Porzingis, that should be a relative breath of fresh air, because now you'll get a quote-unquote fresh start with a new coaching staff. You have an owner who clearly believes that you are much more maligned than what you should have been. And more importantly, you're going into an offseason healthy. That's important, because now we're not focusing on whether or not Kristaps Porzingis is going to have to come back late, into a season dealing with an injury. He is now able to focus on the totality of his game. If you've seen anything from his Instagram, apparently he's doing much of the same also. Kristaps Porzingis, who continues to put himself in that position, says, look, I'm ready to be capable of what I'm capable of and being a better version of himself. It's good news to hear if you're a Mavericks fan. Can that ultimately be what he is when it comes to being on the basketball court? Only time will tell. As much as you and I have criticized Kristaps Porzingis for the lack of production, what happened in the NBA playoffs, as much as we've criticized him for the contract that he has, as much as we have maligned him, Mark Cuban, for the things that he's not been able to do on the floor and the injuries that he's dealt with through his entire career, this is the offseason and the upcoming season to prove once and for all that, one, Kristaps Porzingis can ultimately be a part of the future of the Mavericks going forward, but two, to himself, that he is that guy that can play alongside Luka Doncic and can shut up the criticisms of whatever his relationship or lack thereof is with Luka Doncic. Is he jealous? Is he resentful? Is he this? Is he that? I don't know. But what I do know is that the Mavericks believe he's a big part of their future. And if that's the case, I guess we'll have to let it ride and see ultimately what happens with Kristaps Porzingis. But by the sounds and his words anyway, it sounds like Porzingis himself is ready to put all this behind him and move forward. The question is, can Maverick fans do the same for themselves going forward? Because it's most likely that Kristaps Porzingis is coming back for at least one more year to run it back, even if it's to rebuild his trade value to see what you could potentially get for him at the deadline. Kristaps Porzingis isn't going anywhere for a little while. You can find me on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram at Kevin Gray Sports. Be sure to hit that subscribe button right there for all things Kevin Gray Sports here on YouTube. It's been another episode of The Gray Area. We'll talk to you later. Peace.